Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, tonight we have a special guest, Issam Bahour bilha or bilha? Bilha. Issam Bahour, not our Sheikh Issam, but Issam Bahour, inshallah, who is a Palestinian, who is a lawyer. He's going to speak with us today, inshallah, tonight, about the occupation, about the current conditions, and because he is a lawyer, he'll talk about some of the things that we need to look out for in terms of what is within our rights and what isn't. And without further ado, if I can have someone help me bring the table, inshallah. Two chairs. Sit down. You guys want to talk at the same time, or? Yeah, we'll be. Okay, I'll pass it over. I mean, if it's in the mic's in the middle. No. No, I didn't. Waleed. Waleed, nice to meet you.
Bring this a little closer. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So my name is Issam. I'm originally Palestinian. I'm also a lawyer. I work for a company in Nashville, in-house, in a commercial sense. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Waleed Nasser. I'm also Palestinian, from Nashville, Tennessee. I was born and raised here. I'm an immigration lawyer. My practice is based in Chicago, Illinois, but I still have family here in Nashville, so I come down all the time.
And kind of as a little background, and then the roadmap for today, some of these areas of law that we talk about, so even though we don't work directly in that field, we handle a variety of cases. We've handled, employee discrimination cases for Muslims and stuff of that nature, so that gives us a little background into the area we're going to talk about. Kind of as a lawyer, you got to start every conversation with, this isn't legal advice. It's just some of our opinions, as well as some of the case law and other material floating around related to these subject areas. So we wanted to kick off today by starting by talking about the occupation and the history of Palestine, as well as free speech. And then if you face retaliation in any way, what are some of the, what are some of your options? And so that's a good thing that there is recourse that you could take. So, the history of Palestine started at the end. Let me just pull up some notes here. Yeah, so it started at the end of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. The British mandate was controlled Palestine from 1917 to 1948. That's the date that, the year that Israel claims that their state was started. What we know happened in 1948 was the Nakba. So during the Nakba, over 80% of Palestinians and what became Israel were expelled, and approximately 80% of Palestinian land was seized by Zionists. At the time, the United Nations had put forth a plan. The Jews who controlled 6% of Palestine were to be apportioned 56% of the land. Of course, at the time, Palestinians rejected, and then the British coordinated their withdrawal with some of the Zionist Jewish gangs that committed the Nakba and expelled Palestinians. So after the Nakba, kind of Palestinians were divided. To jump to a little more recent time, in '67, Israel attacked, took control of the rest of Palestine, which was being held by Egypt and Jordan at the time. Then in the 90s, the Oslo Accord, which, was an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis to withdraw from Gaza and to begin a protracted withdrawal from the West Bank. They initiated a 5-year plan where, it was to be a gradual withdrawal from the West Bank. That still hasn't happened yet. So the way things are currently in Palestine, you have 2.1 million Palestinians that are living in Gaza. They're Palestinians. They have a specific ID number, an Israeli ID number called the Hawiyya. Palestinians in Gaza have one type of Hawiyya. There is about 1.5 to 1.7 million Palestinians that live in Al-Quds, Jerusalem, and the occupied Palestinian territories that are known as Israel. Those have a separate Hawiyya, separate identification card. And then you have about 2.7 million Palestinians that live in the West Bank. They have their own identification card. Palestinians are not allowed free movement, so Palestinians in Gaza can't go to occupied Palestine or visit Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. They can't go to the West Bank. Palestinians in West Bank can't go into the interior or visit Masjid al-Aqsa. Palestinians in the interior can't go to Gaza or the West Bank. In order to move among these three areas, you need special permits that are routinely denied. Specifically in Gaza, Palestinians have been denied permits to receive medical treatment, to go study, to go visit family, and a visit to Masjid al-Aqsa is just completely off the table. Before the events that have happened in the past couple years, the situation on the ground in Gaza is this. Over 18% or over 50% of the population is under the age of 18. So of the 2.1 million people, 2.2 million people roughly that are living in Gaza, most of them are under the age of 18. Most of them are minors. I think 30 to 40% of those are even 14 or younger. Gaza, even though having one of the most educated populations in the world, has an unemployment rate of over 50%. And that's due to the blockade. So although, the Israelis and the Western media likes to claim, Gaza is its own country, they have their own problems. Everything is controlled by Israel. Israeli news websites and organizations and the Israeli military, will outright state this. So Palestinians in Gaza have, you know, their food intake regulated. Israelis count every calorie that goes in there. They have their water regulated. You know, they don't have 95% of the water in Gaza isn't drinkable. And Israel controls the drinking water that comes in. Israel also controls their movement. You know, they can close the borders through a security agreement with Egypt or, you know, the Israeli border. Most of the goods that go into Palestine, think food, medicine, equipment, anything of that nature, come through Israel. And even before the current events, Gaza was only getting power for a few hours a day. You know, people would get the power 8 hours and then they wouldn't have it for 8 hours. They wouldn't have drinking water. They don't have the ability to go visit anywhere. And if you go too far into the sea or if you're a fisherman or something like that, you know, the Israeli military is there waiting for you and they attack you. I think that's kind of the context. A lot of what we're seeing in the media right now, as far as politicians and political pundits and, you know, maybe some of your colleagues, teachers, principals, whatever, it's the same Islamophobic and anti-Brown rhetoric and vocabulary usage that we saw, you know, post 9/11. I think the times have changed. I think, you know, we're more well aware of our rights, and we'll slowly get back into, you know, what freedom of speech looks like as far as the workplace and as far as the school. But I think, you know, a lot of that is like, you know, why are the Palestinians so violent? I think, you know, given the historical context, not even, you know, looking at the genocides and the massacres and, you know, like Sabra and Shatila and the Nakba, and then all the attacks on Gaza in 2014, 2008, all those, just looking at the way that it is currently on the ground. Palestinian violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a response, and so I think it's important to have that context in mind.
Yeah, so that you know, with everything that's going on these days, you know, we want to give our support with our words, with our money, with, you know, lending our hands. So we wanted to just be able to talk a little bit about the best way to do that in a safe way, to avoid any kind of legal repercussions possibly that can come from either private actors like your employers or the government. So we want to make sure that we give our support, and it's very important that we give our support to those that are suffering in Gaza and all over Palestine. But at the same time, there's a pretty ugly and dark history in the United States. It's not too far away of, prosecuting people who give support to the Middle East, employment discrimination against those who support, Palestinian causes and things like that. So we wanted to give you guys just a little bit of a breakdown about, what you can do to continue to voice your support for Palestine, but doing it in a way that's going to be, safe and avoiding any potential issues, and give you some recourse about what to do if you run into some issues. So the overarching concept here is obviously free speech, and the United States prides itself on being a country where you are allowed to say whatever it is that you want. But there are certain restrictions that come with free speech. Free speech is part of the First Amendment, which is one of the main core principles of the United States. But it can be a little bit limited in a way, and I think that Issam is going to talk a little bit about that, and then inshallah I can get into some of the immigration potential consequences for any immigrants in here, and potentially also some criminal consequences that could happen, and then we can talk a little bit about what to do if you find yourself in an issue like that. But we want to just put on the table right now is that we're not trying to, scare anybody. We don't want to deter anyone from supporting Palestine. We're here to give our support to Palestine in a smart way. And, America has a history of taking kind of swift and extreme action against, our community when things like this happen. So we want to make sure that that doesn't this time.
And so I will preface this by saying that I think everyone should be speaking out for Palestine. I think that, we're stronger together. I think, in the past when, anti-Brown, anti-Muslim propaganda has reared its head, the Muslim populations of the United States was kind of on unsteady feet. A lot of us were still immigrants. We hadn't spent much time in this country, and so we were afraid to voice ourselves. I think that, in 2023, the times have changed. I think so, the last major conflict that occurred in Palestine was in 2021. Israel, lost the media war. I'm sure everyone saw the posts on social media and all the calls for humanitarian relief. And so this time we're seeing a lot of fake news floating around. Some of it's even reached the United States president, whether it's Democrat, Republican, unfortunately even some Muslim politicians who are more worried about protecting their own interests, have kind of voiced some of this similar propaganda and fake news. But, ultimately, we're a country that prides itself on free speech. You have free speech. So the First Amendment specifically applies to the government. What that means is you can't be, prosecuted from the government. You can't be imprisoned for free speech. When you look into the private sector workplace, free speech, so you don't have free speech at a private company or for a private employer. You can speak outside of the workplace. That does not stop, an employer from potentially taking action against you. But I think a lot of that action, if you can't use the First Amendment in the workplace to protect yourself, if you face retaliatory action, you can use the Civil Rights Act and various employee discrimination acts, as well as filing a complaint with the EEOC. And so generally, among things that are protected in the workplace in the U.S., public or private, is your gender, your age, your race, and your religion. So, they can't target you for being a Muslim if you're facing questions in the workplace, why are Muslims violent? Why are Muslim Palestinians doing this? Why are people from the Middle East doing this? Or, let's say you speak out for Palestine. And of course, as we're seeing in workplaces across the country, other people are going to be speaking out for Israel, and you're over here speaking out for Palestine, and they take retaliatory action against you. That there's a very strong argument as well as a recourse for action based on race or religion.
Yeah. So that basically that means that you can't go into your private employer thinking that you have a First Amendment right to free speech, because you don't. The First Amendment only protects protects people from when the government wants to stop you from saying something. It does not protect you from when private parties want to stop you from saying something. So you don't have a First Amendment right in your private employment, but there are other protections out there, like Issam was saying. The Civil Rights Act can protect you based on workplace discrimination, on your race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, some other different criteria. So, you know, for example, if you make a social media post that says, you know, I support Hamas, okay, and you get fired for that, really there's not much you can do, because the Civil Rights Act is not going to cover you in that kind of instance, right? They're not discriminating against you based on one of the protected grounds, right? But if you make a post that says all Muslims should rise up against what's going on in Gaza, and then you're fired, then you have a strong argument to say that, you know, your workplace is discriminating against you based on your religion. Thank you, brother. So you have to be, not to get too technical, but you know, you have to be a little bit conscious about what you say, because you know there are some things that you may be protected under, and some things that you might not be.
Yeah, and as an aside, you know, I've pretty vocal about Palestine. Some of the questions you get is like immediately out of the gate, it's like, oh, do you know, condemn Palestinian violence? And you know, you don't see that question being asked to the Israelis or, you know, people of the Jewish faith. It's never, you know, it's always crickets about the atrocities that are happening to Palestinians. And so I don't think that's a question that you have to answer. I think it's important to be smart in the way we approach the topic, as well as smart in, you know, unequivocally supporting Palestinians however they choose to express themselves. How many people here, do you have anything else to add about the workplace?
I think that's good.
Okay.
Unless there are any questions about like workplace, or we can do questions at the end, whatever y'all prefer.
Yeah, we can do questions at the end. So how many people here are still in school? Show of hands. All right, so a decent crowd. So with you guys, it's a little different. You have more rights than in the private workplace. So you have the right to speak out, hand out flyers, petitions, and wear expressive clothing in school. Basically, as long as you don't disrupt the function of the school or violate school policies that don't hinge on the specific message. So, you know, if a teacher or a principal tells you, hey, you know, you can't speak out for Palestine, you can't wear a kufi or a hat that has Palestine on it, or, you know, a shirt that has a message about Palestine, that can be considered a violation of your rights. So, you know, a school can ban students from wearing hats. They could say, hey, you know, as part of our dress code, you're not allowed to wear hats in school. And if you show up wearing a Palestine hat, they could be like, hey, you need to remove your hat. But if they let, you know, everyone wear other types of hat, you know, whether it's a hat with Cristiano Ronaldo or, you know, Nashville Predators or whatever, PUBG, they can wear those hats, but then, you know, there's a problem if someone's wearing a Muslim hat or a hat that supports Palestine. That's unconstitutional for the school to do. It's considered a violation of your First Amendment rights.
Yeah, and I think we've been seeing a lot of stuff going on the campuses. You know, pro-Palestine, like, mashallah, we have a really strong presence. You know, our young Palestinians and supporters are really prevalent in the universities. But there's been a lot of clashes. I mean, I'm sure that you guys have probably seen stuff on social media, but, you know, the counter protesters are attacking, there's fights going on, there's clashes and things like that. So we definitely want to encourage everyone to stay safe, voice your opinion and stay safe. But like Issam was saying, yeah, there's you know, the Supreme Court has called a lot of these cases that we learned about in law school when it comes to the First Amendment, they're really, a lot of them are about schools. Like most of them arise and the conflict begins and make their way to the Supreme Court because of something that started in a university. And the Supreme Court has called the university the quintessential marketplace of ideas. It's where ideas are shared and bought and sold and adopted and given up, and, you know, so it's the Supreme Court and the United States holds the universities to to a very high and special, a special kind of place when it comes down to speech, because this is the ideal place for speech. So you shouldn't feel intimidated to speak freely in the university.
Yeah, and that applies to first through 12 as well. So that free speech in school requirement kind of hinges on violation of direct school policy, like a dress code. If your school only allows polos, you can't come wearing a T-shirt that supports Palestine. They can ask you to remove that. But the restrictions can't specifically target, support for Palestine, as well as various other issues, right? And so in schools, they can, if it's against a school policy, a universal school policy, they can restrict that. If it's disruptive of the school, they can restrict that. However, a controversial opinion or an opinion that's considered bad taste, someone's like, hey, I agree with this, or, this is poor timing. So for example, if a school comes to you and says, hey, you're wearing a kufiya or you're wearing a T-shirt that supports Palestine, you have to take it off because, Israelis passed away in this conflict, and they're looking at it like it's controversial or bad taste. They can't ask you to remove that. That's within your constitutional rights.
Yeah. So I think now we can maybe seg into immigration just briefly. I don't know how many immigrants we have in here. You don't have to raise your hands if you don't want to, but just briefly, well, I guess we're all immigrants really, but briefly, there is a pretty strong law. There are very strong laws on the books that will prevent immigrants from gaining immigration benefits if they have provided any kind of support to a terrorist organization, quote, quote. So there are, under the immigration laws, there are three kinds of terrorist organizations. There is a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3 terrorist organization. Tier 1s are those that are kind of just, they're written into the laws as a terrorist organization. Tier 2 are ones that the State Department classifies as terrorist organizations. They can be removed from being terrorist organizations. They can be added and removed. And then tier 3 is a definition that is so broad that can almost encompass everything, which is a group of 2 or more people who come together to engage in terrorist activity, which is defined in another part of the law. And so there are many different grounds to find an immigrant ineligible for an immigration benefit, but the broadest one is what's called material support to a terrorist organization, one of any of the 3 terrorist organizations. So material support can be obviously number 1, giving your money, number 2, giving a helping hand, number 3, giving financial, giving some sort of humanitarian aid can even be considered material support. Thankfully, giving, supporting in a protected speech manner is not considered to give any kind of material support to a terrorist organization. The main way we see this kind of come up in immigration is that somebody made donations to an organization that's classified as a terrorist organization. So Hamas is under US law a tier 2 terrorist organization. So we are not allowed to give them any money. So immigrants are not allowed to donate any money. Everyone really, we're gonna get to the criminal part soon, but immigrants are not allowed to donate money or give any kind of aid to Hamas. So that makes it very, very tricky to lend our financial support to our brothers and sisters in need in Gaza.
I will say that to kind of preface that conversation, there's a lot of 501c3s that operate in Gaza, and it's completely fine to donate your money to them, as well as various U.S. Treasury regulations that make exceptions. So as everyone knows, for context, Hamas controls Gaza, as well as the government. So there's various exceptions that have been drafted in U.S. Treasury regulations, like if you need to give money to schools, as well as like hospitals in Gaza and other what are considered traditional government functions, but are completely humanitarian in nature.
Yeah. So so with that, it's for immigrants, they have a pretty tough road ahead of them. It will be a uphill battle, unfortunately, if it is ever, any money is ever discovered that has been given to, an organization like Hamas. But, like Issam was saying, there are lots of organizations that I highly recommend everybody check out. I mean, every organization that purports to give money to Gaza or somewhere in the Middle East will have on their website, something assuring the donors that this is a legitimate type of activity. And if you want, you can always check for yourself by looking at a website called ofac.gov. That's the Office of Foreign Asset Control. Okay, even if you're sending a Western Union to somebody, you should run their name in the OFAC and just check and make sure that that nothing comes up. So under OFAC, they have. I used to work in a refugee resettlement. Amman, Jordan, and we used to pay people their taxi cab fares back, like 2 dinar, it's like $3 or something like that. We would pay them back when they came to visit us, and we had to run everyone's name under OFAC, just to make sure that our organization was not giving money to people who might be, whose name might pop up. So if you ever are, consider donating, making a direct contribution is preferred, but it's not necessarily risk-free. You should just run that name in OFAC, take a little screenshot, protect yourself, save the screenshot, and then if you run it in OFAC, you should be in good shape. Yeah. Organizations and individuals can be run, their names can be run in OFAC.
Yeah. I will say that, especially nowadays, there's quite a few, nonprofits, small, large. There's even American ones that are working directly in Gaza in various areas: education, food, water, hospitals. There's even routine doctor missions. On CNN the other day, we saw a doctor, who's working at a government hospital in Palestine, who, was an American and a bunch of Westerners. So there's a bunch of exceptions codified. So if you're working with a government registered 501c3 nonprofit, there's nothing to worry about.
And finally, from the criminal aspect, it's very similar to the immigration. It's a little bit less strict under the criminal law. Honestly, there's not that many rules. There's no tier 3 organization. So basically, you don't want to give money directly to any organization that's been considered to be a terrorist organization. Again, OFAC everything. You can just run it through OFAC before you give your donations. I don't know how many people here have heard of the Holy Land Foundation. Yeah. So, I'm familiar with those cases. Unfortunately, I've worked on some immigration cases for people who have lingering Holy Land Foundation issues, even now, 20 years later. There's a really, really great organization out of Dallas, Texas, that I used to work for. Actually, my first job as a lawyer is called the Muslim Legal Fund of America. They have really, really great resources, and they're on the front lines of the kind of stuff that we're talking about today. So, we're not necessarily experts on this issue, but if anyone is thinking about starting a significant, organization or starting a fundraiser and you want to give direct contributions to the people of Gaza, and you want to make sure you do it right, I really think that the Muslim Legal Fund of America is a really great organization to talk to. They're very familiar with this, and they actually started off with, representing Holy Land Foundation people, and that's how the organization started, and it grew from there. So they're very familiar with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so I will say that in the, I think it's important to, use your voice, use your money to support humanitarian causes in Gaza, and that if you face any sort of retaliatory action, let's say you're still going through the immigration process or at work or even at school, there's all sorts of resources. So the Muslim Legal Fund that Waleed was talking about, CARE, what does that acronym stand for again?
Council on American Islamic Relations.
Council on American Islamic Relations, as well as PAL Legal. So that there's various legal nonprofits that will work directly with you. And feel free to use myself and Waleed as a resource. We're happy to help out. If you run into any trouble at work or at school, give us a call. We'll make sure that that all your legal options are exercised and that you're protected. And then I guess that kind of wraps up what we have for you. If anyone has questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
All of these information, the organizations, contact information on one paper and share it with the society here, and here.
Yeah. Inshallah, I'll put something together and float it to the Sheikh.
Any questions?
Yes.
What should we do if we get threats on social media or in the schools? Who do we report?
So I think that if you get a threat on social media or if you get a threat on the street, I think that would be considered as just like a typical law enforcement, type of matter that the police can deal with. I don't think it would be any different than, somebody just driving down the street and without this situation going on and giving you a threat. I think you would follow the same kind of procedure and then let the law enforcement people decide whether this is something that is bigger or not, whether it's something that needs to be considered as a hate crime investigation or something that needs to be referred to like federal law enforcement agencies. I think that if you want it to be that, you can advocate for your perspective with the initial responding law enforcement agency and tell them, hey, this, you need to follow up on this. This is like a hate crime, or I really feel threatened. You know what I mean? So it's really kind of up to you what you want to do with it. But I think the first step is to always, if you really feel threatened and you want to do something about it, just contact the non-emergency line of the local police department.
Or if it's still ongoing, even the emergency line. But definitely step one, contact the authorities. I think it's important to get with CARE as well. I think that it's important they kind of keep statistics on anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Pakistani, Desi, Afghani, whatever ethnicities you are. They keep a kind of a tally of any potential hate crimes, and so they use that to advocate with the government and with law enforcement agencies for us. So I think it's important to report them. Even if you may think it's minor, I think it's good for the Muslims to have statistics so we can approach the politicians and say, hey, just like you give protection to other religious groups in this country or other ethnic minorities in this country, we need to be protected too. There's a clear uptick in hateful remarks or hateful actions.
Inshallah, if there's any more questions, sisters, if you have any questions, you can come to the side and you can ask there. Any other questions? Any questions? Izzo, yalla bismillah.
How can defend yourself if someone puts you in why you bring the upset? That's it. What happens about defend yourself?
Defending yourself if you're wearing a Palestinian shirt.
That's a great question, actually. That's a phenomenal question. You want to take it on first, Issam?
Yeah, so I think it's important to, be vocal, say, I'm here advocating for equality for all, for justice, for an end to the oppression. I think, your biggest tool to utilize is always, your words and your ideas.
Yeah, and if you're attacked, and this is not this is happening now. I saw a kind of a disturbing video on social media the other day where, like in the mall where they have those kiosks in the middle, where there's always I don't want to stereotype or anything, but there's always some Israeli guy there selling like Dead Sea products or something like that. So there was this kid that was wearing like a Palestine shirt, and he walked by this Israeli guy who's selling the Dead Sea products. And then the Israeli guy is about to just he needed two guys to restrain him, or he was gonna strangle this kid. And the kid is 9 or 10 years old and is just horrified, trying to get away. And unfortunately, I don't think it's common, but at this point, I don't really think it would surprise us if we see or heard something like that on social media. If somebody's bothering you, harassing you, puts your hands on you, I don't.
Yeah.
my dad would always tell me, you know, you got to take care of yourself and take care of your sisters. You know what I mean? Like you have to do what you have to do, and just resort back to, you know, whatever kind of training, learning that you've had in the past. Try to dial 911 if you need to engage in a physical confrontation. I can tell you that if you're not the initial, you know, provocative party, the law will most likely protect you under like the self-defense laws if you have to protect yourself by using, you know, physical acts. So don't feel like you have to take the beating or you have to take the threats. You should engage if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, you know, you are just like everyone else in this country. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to defend yourself, defend your property. You know, you have the right to vote. You have the right to be vocal. I think that, you know, the Muslim community is an important part of this country. We make up, you know, the moral fiber, as well as, you know, some of the thought leaders. Mashallah, a lot of us are, you know, entrepreneurial or well educated, and successful in various different fields, and, you know, various different methods. So I think it's important to be united. It's important to, you know, use your voice, use your resources, for Palestine and, you know, any other issue that tugs at your heart and at your moral fiber. I think that there is always a lot, unfortunately, going on in the Muslim world, you know, between Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Morocco, Turkey, Libya. I mean, I think it's always important to stand up for each other, and it's always important to continue to advocate. You know, gone are the days where Muslims should feel like an afterthought in this country, or feel like, hey, you know, we don't belong, we need to be quiet, and, you know, try not to draw attention ourselves.
We have a question from the sisters. Yes. You can grab it.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being here.
Alaikum.
Just words for mothers that have kids in elementary, middle, and high school. How can we advocate for our children and also for us, you know, hijabi women? Just words for us that may help us.
Mm-hmm. So we actually have we're part of a kind of a WhatsApp group of other Muslim lawyers across the country. Mashallah, there's, you know, hundreds and thousands that are involved. So there are, you know, some templates floating around. So if specifically related to this issue, if, you know, your teacher, your child's teacher or a superintendent or an administrator is forcing a message upon your child, you know, there's a letter that you can send. I'll say also, don't be afraid to, you know, voice concerns, whether, you know, it's remarks made by educators, other students to your child. I would bring those concerns to the school. If you think that, you know, the school isn't doing a good job handling it, or if you think it's egregious, or, you know, it's something shocking, like, you know, how dare they reprimand my child for being Palestinian or being Muslim, or whatever it may, I think that you can contact us. There's, you know, CARE, there's Muslim Legal, there's a lot of nonprofits that, you know, will directly help you address these issues by writing letters as well as potentially filing lawsuits. That's another thing. I think the courts are our friends. I think that there is legal recourse. You know, kind of as Muslims, we're like, oh, we want to resolve this. You know, we don't want to use the legal system. But I think in this country, everyone uses the legal system. You know, everything from business disputes to unjust actions by the school administrators. There is legal recourse that we could take.
Yeah. Just sign your kids up at NIA and you should be good.
That too. Mashallah, we have a great program here.
So the spaces are full. Any other questions? Khalas?
So you did not answer
Hijabi.
I think that the same, you know, the same principle applies. What Issam said is, you know, seek. You know, reach out to us, reach out to organizations. There's a lot of civic organizations that will, you know, assist you and advocate on your behalf at no additional cost. I think that if a school adopts some sort of policy or some semblance of a policy that, women can't wear head coverings or that head coverings are generally prohibited in the school, I think that at that point you've got yourself like a significant violation of the law and a pretty solid lawsuit. But overall, if there's bullying, if there's sentiment from the educators, the faculty, and staff, like anti-hijab sentiment at all, I think that reaching out first, there's a kind of a concept in the law called exhaustion of remedies. So it basically means you should kind of try everything before you jump to like the nuclear option, right? So you wanna just try to take all the reasonable steps necessary to try to solve your issue. So, maybe if it's a teacher, go to the principal. If the principal doesn't do anything, go to the board of education. If the board doesn't do anything, maybe think about talking to a lawyer. Maybe the lawyer will write a demand letter. The demand letter doesn't work, then maybe you want to think about filing a lawsuit.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, my kid is bullied, I'm going to file a lawsuit in federal court against the bully. It doesn't go over well. You want to try to just take the reasonable steps to try to exhaust your options. And that's where, lawyers like us, if you give us a call, I think we would be glad to assess the situation and just let you know, like, maybe this is a reasonable next step for you to take.
Yeah, and specifically to address the question about the hijab, so we talked about how, you have freedom of speech and expression in schools, but that, schools can have dress codes. So there are exemptions there. Let's say, a school says no hats or head coverings. There are specific exemptions in U.S. law for, things like the hijab, things for dressing modestly. So, if a school enforces an immodest dress code, whether it's for, boys or girls, you can, dress modestly. You can wear your hijab in public spaces, at work, at school, without, any recourse. And if they tell you, hey, you can't wear a hijab to school anymore, that's a violation of your constitutional rights at that point. It's pretty clear and obvious. Alhamdulillah, this isn't France. We have certain religious protections that are enshrined in the Constitution as well as, various Supreme Court cases.
I'll expand a little bit on that from a religious perspective. I can imagine that sisters, especially with the current environment, they feel scared, Yeah. So I want to remind, the sisters that if everyone got together to harm you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not intend for them to harm you, they could never harm you. So I would encourage that you read before leaving the house, Bismillahi tawakkaltu ala Allah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that you read Ayatul Kursi, that you read Mu'awwidhatayn, and realize that no one can harm you if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your creator and He's protecting you. That's number one. And number two, I would suggest that if you have to go, let's say, leave somewhere at nighttime, have perhaps your husband, your brother, or a man accompany you so that you're not putting yourself out there in danger. And also be very careful if you're walking at night or you're walking in places where nobody else is there. Maybe carry some pepper spray or carry something that you can use to defend yourself. We've seen cases in the past where women were attacked, were harassed, and I'm sure even women in our community that have experienced this. Perhaps some of them getting like an evil look from someone, or it can even escalate. Someone, my wife was telling me the other day, someone was following her. You see in a parking lot. So I would suggest take perhaps pepper spray or things of that nature to protect yourself. And the last thing I would mention, if any sister is ever harmed, and I hope, if anybody is listening to this that would intend harm to our sisters, if any of our sisters is ever harmed, the whole community will come and find that person.
Yes.
And we won't let them go.
Yes.
Legally and physically.
Yes.
Legally and physically, we will not let them go.
Sadaqta, ya Sheikh. I think on that point, so there's a question, the sisters, and we'll get to that in a second. I think on that point, our Muslim sisters, that sometimes we forget are, more visibly Muslim, specifically the ones wearing hijab are more visibly Muslim than the rest of us. I think for the most part, men can kind of blend in and look like other non-Muslims, but, our sisters don't have that luxury. So I think it's important to, if you ever see an incident, to stand up for that Muslim sister. Feel free to give us a call if you get in legal trouble. Gladly take that case, all day, every day, whatever you need. And then, if you're ever in a public space, a grocery store, a park or something and you see a Muslim sister, even if you don't know her because she's wearing the hijab, you know, she doesn't know you, it's good to say salam alaikum to just as you're passing by to make your presence known. You know, more than anything, we want to make sure that our sisters, mothers, daughters feel comfortable anywhere and everywhere.
I know this is a off-the-wall maybe question, but I know Tennessee has a conceal and carry or whatever if we feel like, if I feel like I need I don't have a male to protect me or whatever, and I need some type of protection. How does this work in Islam? This is for Sheikh and for the lawyers. And even for our brothers too.
From a Shari'i perspective, the Sahaba used to carry swords, so Bismillah, go ahead, inshallah. For defense.
Yeah. So from a legal perspective, though, you know, as far as the law in Tennessee, they've really relaxed concealed carry laws, so you don't need any sort of permitting or paperwork to own a firearm in this country. You don't need any paperwork to, you know, open carry now, and I think that there is a course that you could take online to conceal carry. I know a lot of people in the Muslim community, you know, conceal carry pretty regularly to protect themselves and others. And then, you know, Tennessee has very strong, you know, stand your ground laws. So, you know, if you or a third party are ever, you know, facing criminal acts, or, you know, being attacked violently or threatened, you have the right to exercise self-defense. You know, also part of your constitutional rights and very well protected in the state of Tennessee.
Any other questions? خلاص, I think we should just wrap it up بإذن الله تعالى. Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Issam and Brother Waleed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you both. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this gathering. وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Now all the questions started. How are you?